Just want to begin just by saying, big thanks for yourself, basically, just to put something like this on at such short notice, and obviously the guys at Playermaker as well for facilitating it. And obviously it's been amazing so far, all the presentations that have been going on, and I'm sure the rest of them will be just as insightful. Just on that, on where we're at the moment, I just hope everybody's staying safe and sound and staying indoors, and look after one another. Just following on from Steve's intro, really, just about me. I've been at the union now for just over 10 years, kind of working through from an internship into S&C and then into sort of sports science. And that's kind of grown and grown and grown over the last few years, really. Alongside doing my PhD, we're now in a position where we're quite fortunate, really, that we centrally control a lot of our sports science within Welsh Rugby. So that's not just the national teams, all the way down to 18s, 20s, seniors, but sevens, women's, and also the 4 regions as well. So we're quite in a big position, but at the same time, it's quite a fortunate position. Just on my presentation, really, I kind of want to just talk through a couple of my learnings, really, and my sort of philosophy on sports science and how I've kind of applied that. Probably similar to Laura's, it's not going to be too heavily sciencey. Hopefully it's kind of quite pragmatic and kind of give a lot of lessons to everybody, really, that they can kind of take forward into sport, not just in specific to rugby, really, and just improve everybody's practice. So I kind of just want to talk about really like the research, the sort of reality, really, and what that kind of looks like. So our aim, obviously, is to maximise and optimally prepare our players physically and tactically, and sort of reduce injury risk. And it's obviously about striking a balance to that. Now, the reality is when the players are in the season, they come to us in an international window, which may last either 5 or 8 weeks. Players are coming off the back of playing European games. Some have played 10 games, 14 games. It can vary all the time. So everybody's at different points. And, the first point really is that despite what we kind of want from a scientific point of view, the reality is that no preparation is ideal. We kind of have to make best with what we've got. The second point to that then is that we can't avoid injury risk. Unfortunately, because of rugby being a contact sport, injury is inevitable. Obviously, we can lower that risk. I think everybody kind of gets on the top of predicting injuries, and I think that's impossible because, we can't really predict the weather. So to kind of take that further into injuries, I think there's too many variables and there's too much noise in that data. So all we can do is what a few people have said so far is control your controllables. But, inevitably, that's what we try to do. I think the main sort of thing with this as well, which the reality as well, is that probably 15 years ago when it kind of started, I think there was a bit of an uneven balance between how we prepared and how we played. Now, I know a few people have sort of said, like, what you do in a week doesn't necessarily matter to what happens on a weekend from a workload point of view. But I know that at one point there was a discussion that previously players perhaps weren't fit enough to train and play. So either we did what we needed to do in the week, so whether that was a specific distance, but also, did a specific amount of rugby content, of tactical and technical content, but then that might be too much then and sort of negate from what we do on the weekend. On the flip side, we undercook what the players are going to do in the week. So, okay, they're going to be fresher on the weekend, but then we leave ourselves slightly underdone going into a test match based on what we've kind of got from a technical and tactical point of view. So, it's difficult, but we have to sort of not compromise our standards. And I think it's taken a while, but I think we're now at a point where we're fit to train and play. So no matter what the coaches want, that's where we kind of need to be. So a quote that I quite like is that under pressure, we don't rise to the occasion, we stoop to the level of our training. Where I think that's quite important really is that, generally we talk about like our superstars, and look, generally I'm not, I'm aware that obviously superstars will win a game for you, but the other players can also lose it for you as well. So it's important that even though we kind of focus on our big players, and of course, like they are the ones that can do something out of nothing, but at the same time, we have to consider that there are in rugby 15 guys on the field, so we have to make sure every single one of them is fit, but then also understands their roles and responsibility. So one of the things which I kind of like to use with coaches, so we have to say that we have to create an environment that promotes and challenges players. So I kind of make it very simplistic, really, for coaches, and kind of talk in a language that they understand. So obviously, technically, we have to make sure we challenge them. So we have skills under pressure, skills under fatigue. Tactically, so again, we have to understand a game plan, time, score, various scenarios, situations. Physically, so we know games largely aren't decided when players are fresh. It's decided when players are fatigued. So again, we have to make sure players are prepared so they survive in those sort of worst case scenarios, but also they're able to think in that critical moment of the last 15, 20 minutes. And then also mentally, so dealing with pressure of the game, making the correct decisions, and also solving problems. Like I say, I use this kind of language because I think, in sort of coaching pedagogy, it's kind of what coaches use, and I think they can hang on to this. Probably not what I would like to use, but I think it kind of gives a good sort of instinct as to what kind of coaches want to do. So I think it's important that, from a sports scientist point of view, is that you're trying to relate to coaches. And, as we've said previously, they're not numbers people, they're coaches at the end of the day. So it's important that we use a common language to make sure that we can get our points across to them correctly. So using our research to inform our practice, well, there's a lot of research and there's a lot of information available to us. So, I think the first thing that we have to do is consider our limiting factors of performance. So with that, I kind of think, what's the main things that's preventing us from winning? And that's kind of a good starting point for me to always kind of work back from, rather than kind of, I know I've sometimes been guilty of sort of looking at the fluffy stuff and what sort of the 1%ers. I quite like sort of Nick Gill's analogy, really, of, focusing on the sort of big rocks of a program. So before we kind of focus on the 1%ers, it's just making sure that, and again, I know it's a pretty crappy thrown around cliche, but I do think it's right, is that we kind of focus on the main things first. What are we about, and then kind of build on from that. So we can then explore the resources available to us once we know what we're trying to answer and what element we're trying to improve. So sometimes that can come from sort of internal. So again, we collect a lot of information, and as someone said earlier, that we have to be able to justify why we are monitoring, as opposed to just monitoring for the sake of it. So I think, and as Laura just said, we can't just, if we're not doing anything with it, then we should potentially sack it off. But then also we look at externally as well. So obviously we look at peer-reviewed research as a way of sort of trying to add something new to our practice, something that we know that works. So using that now to inform our practice. So for example, some external research, so using the latest research to inform our practices. So a couple of examples, for our training, recovery and nutrition, talking on some of the work that I've published with regards to sport-specific algorithms. I think this is largely, I don't know whether James is going to come on to this, but I know that for me, this is quite a big area, and I think doing more with the data that we have, and I think this is an area I think will get bigger and bigger and bigger. I think we're only scratching the surface of this at the moment, but that's an area that's building. And then a couple of other papers that we've done from the Welsh Rugby Union with Adam Beard, just on repeat sprint hypoxia, and again the benefits of that for anaerobic performance. One of the ones then that have been a bit indifferent really for us is our halftime re-warm ups. So again, players, we've introduced that with our players with sort of a bit of a mixed bag approach. We kind of give the players a menu. So look, I think from a research standpoint, how it's sort of set out in an ideal world is something that you'd want to do, and that's probably what the research says. The reality is that depending on the score, how they're playing, players are sort of, sometimes they take up on it, sometimes they don't. But for me, as long as we kind of give them options and they all kind of do something, we're better than where we were before. But obviously, we're probably not at the ideal scenario yet. So, we provide the blankets, but again, some players like it, some don't. But we just kind of make use of what we can do, really. The other sort of stuff we've done from an internal point of view, again, so we've used those algorithms that we've done. So we look at that data interpretation and trends. You know, I've been at the union now for 10 years. We've got 10 years worth of data, so we can understand what player is doing. We can understand the journey of a player from under 20s through to senior rugby, through to international rugby. But then it's also important that we understand the player roles and demands. So obviously with us at the moment, having a change of coaching staff, we understand what the different roles are for different players, different strategies, what's actually asked of them. So again, it's about us trying to meet the demands of the game for those specific players. And again, we review sort of our current limitations. So one of the things I always kind of think of as well is what makes the boat go faster. I know it's kind of something I've stolen from rowing. I think, again, it's one of those things that avoids you kind of looking at the fluffy stuff, and just make sure that everything that you do is making an impact on performance. So informing our practice, so a good example of some internal research really. So it's always important to consider the things that make a difference. Otherwise, as I've said before, is that we kind of get rid of it. So like our principles, so ideally what we try to do is we try to make our training more intense, more challenging than matches. So a sort of kind of a cheesy strap line really is that we step up to train and step down to play. So the idea being is that everything is really kind of geared towards no surprises for the weekend. So when a player comes to that, whether it be physically, whether it be technically, tactically, we should, in theory, have them fully equipped in a working week to understand what's coming on the weekend. So within that, now we've involved our drills and our sessions to kind of meet the demands of moments of those game scenarios. So we have to make them sort of nice and varied. So we have to consider sort of dimensions and the number of decisions that they're making. This arguably comes from a session focus. So obviously what the coaches want. So whether that's a skill focus, whether it's a more of a clarity type session. So again, you know, we sort of program our sort of training load to meet what we think the coaches need from that session, what they need from the players. We also kind of consider the sort of tactical periodization element of it, which I'm not sure if I'm a massive fan of that saying specifically. If anybody wants to have a debate with me, then I'm more than happy to have it, because I think in rugby, I think it's a little bit different. But, you know, I think it's definitely something that has use within rugby. But understanding really that when we train, just where in the week, it all sort of fits together to make sure that we kind of get the end product that the players are, again, fully equipped physically and mentally and tactically for the weekend. So a good example really of how we've changed. So just to kind of give a bit of an overview really of our sort of normal Tuesday from our point of view. So this would be a typical training session for us. So each, as you can see along the bottom there, you've got warm up, drill 1, 2, 3, 4 to 7. And then on the left-hand side, just for arguments, we sort of had our meters per minute for the drill. So we usually start off generic sort of warm up. Then we'll have a drill, which would be usually like an anaerobic games block, which could be between 3 and 5 minutes. And then we sort of have sort of 5 to 6 minute drill blocks then. So as you can see, drill 2, 3 and 4 are probably more contact dominant drills. So that would typically be sort of defense drill, perhaps a contact technique drill, maybe a second defense block. And then towards the end, then you've got 5, 6 and 7. They might be sort of like an exits drill. So sort of like a kicking game element, and then also then some attack stuff and a counter attack as well. So you can kind of see how that's how a normal session flows. But I just want to kind of draw really that you've got a contact dominant block, and then we've kind of got a running dominant block. So, you know, we all have our sort of drill demands libraries, which Darren spoke about this morning. I mean, so we know what each drill gives us. But as you can see, probably in the middle there, we've got approximately 15 minutes of low locomotor activity and high contact demands. And then towards the end, then we've got the opposite. We've got high locomotor activity and low contact demands. So what we decided to do then was sort of rearrange the puzzle, I guess, and just kind of make it look perhaps a little bit more like a game. So we had exactly the same session content, we just reordered. So the previous slide was, say, a Tuesday, then the following Tuesday, we used exactly the same drill, exactly the same drills, exactly the same timings, we just played about with the order. So from where it looked like, from our point of view, is that, and it's just a bit more common sense really from it to make it look a bit more like the game. So even though each drill replicates the game for that specific section, perhaps when you put it all together and you've got 3 contact drills in a row and 3 running drills in a row, perhaps it doesn't. The results from it really were quite, unsurprising. Well, surprising actually from our point of view. They were threw a bit of a curveball. So unsurprisingly, we had the same locomotor load, so we had the same distance, same high speed, more or less, between players. But the one thing that did change is we had a higher internal load. So we had a higher training effect. So we used first beat to monitor our heart rate, and that was higher. And also the players then subjectively, I know we've had discussions on that previously, but again, subjectively, players also said that was a harder session. So you could argue that there's an increased stimulus there. I'm not quite sure how and where, but from the outside looking in and probably being a little bit pragmatic, is that it does look more game specific. So again, some of the benefits of this is the same time on feet. So that's an easy win for players' point of view. The coaches were happy, that's probably the most important thing as well, is that they had the same amount of time. They had the same amount, we didn't take any time off anybody. All we did, we just reordered the drills. So anybody that would normally go 3rd perhaps went 6th or whatever. So potentially now we've got to increase the stimulus, because rugby is running contact, which, going back to the previous slide, it sort of replicates perhaps what we see in games. And then, look, I'm aware that it's still not perfect, but again, I'm quite happy with the fact that probably we're giving the players a stimulus that's closer to the game. Obviously, unfortunately, you can't play 15 on 15 every single day of the week, because you probably wouldn't make it through to Saturday. But generally, that what we see now is something that's closer to replicating the demands of the game, and hopefully, getting more bang for our buck. Other changes that we've kind of made, so again, try to revisit our principles. So are our drills meeting demands? So again, and also what are our limitations of match play? So one of the things that we decided to do is that we sort of sat down with some of our coaches and we looked at all of our drill bank, and without using any of the numbers, we kind of added some arbitrary sort of values to it, just out of 10, and just saying, right, out of 10, this drill has a high running component, low contact component, and we think that the decision-making element of it was a 6 out of 10. Then you go on to drill 2. So we could then look at all these various drills. Now, the essence of a lot of these drills, at the end of the day, the coaches are the experts. So it's important that their value and their input, and the drills actually usually are very, very good drills. So we're not trying to change the drill. We're just trying to tweak it in a sense of how we can potentially make some of these drills more demanding. So, for example, if I take drill 2, we're not trying to make all of these a 10 out of 10, for example. We're just trying to see if we can make the running component from a 3 to a 4. Can we make the decision-making component a 7 to an 8? And if we can do that, then obviously then we're kind of getting closer to a game. If you assume a game is 10, 10, 10. So if we can just make those sort of minor adjustments, and like I said, we're not trying to change the essence of the drills. So I mean, just tactically, technically, can we increase the decision-making? Do they have more decisions, make more difficult decisions to make? Do you add in extra defenders, make them move at different speeds? Things like that we can kind of do. So a good example of this, so this is an example of what we did with some of our sevens coaches. So initially this drill used to be done with just a pole and just a basic evasion sort of drill. But as you start to see now how it's changed, there's a much bigger technical, tactical, physical and mental sort of element to it. So I'll just let it play through. Hopefully it's not too glitchy. So as you can see, obviously it's very specific to sevens, but also this has been used now for some of our wingers and 15s, for players that are in spaces like this that have to evade and beat a man. So it's a great way for them to sort of get used to having these skill sets in a one-on-one situation. And as you can see, that it is competitive. They obviously start to open up a lot, so we get some max velocity exposure. So again, largely the players are not realizing necessarily they're doing repeat sprints, but for them it's good fun, it's good banter. So it ticks a lot of boxes, and it's, as I said, it's very specific to the demands of what they'll face come Saturday. So again, looking at these drill modifications, like I say, it challenges the players in many ways. So obviously, max velocity, how fast are they, how their acceleration. Again, it's competitive. Decision making, you've got to read and react to your defender. But then also, it's probably more of an attacking drill, but also for a defending drill. If you are defending in a space like that, you have to make those decisions, how to read body, etc. And again, speed. So you're having players in those situations that, again, in excess of 9 meters per second, which is great. And it ticks the box again from a speed point of view, that you don't have to necessarily fit in another speed session. Is it game specific? Yeah, we've already talked about that. Then like I said, players and coaches don't realise necessarily that they're doing speed. And like I say, it ticks a lot of the boxes from a technical, tactical, and mental point of view. So when we're talking about drill modifications, what can we change? Well, we can obviously look at the drill dimensions, like I said, whether we make it bigger, smaller. Obviously, this will change. If we make a contact drill bigger, then obviously the speeds that they might be getting, the locomotor activity might go up. But at the same time, if we want increased contact load, then maybe actually we bring the dimensions down slightly, so then there's a more frequency of collisions. So again, both of them can work in both of our favours. Again, starting positions. So instead of starting in an ideal position, are they coming onto the ball at speed? Where are they receiving it? Do they have to reset to get into a position? So we can play around with that. We have to throw problems at the players randomly as well, making sure that it's ever changing. So, we kind of like to do drills where we are opposed, whether it be by a coach or another player, because then the read and reaction is always going to be different. And that's what the game is reactions to random. Again, we can add in contact, or we can add in running to some of these drills. Like I say, we're not trying to take them up to perhaps the level of a game, but are there ways that we can just increase the element of those? And then finally, could you add a score line, keep score, make it competitive? I know these are things probably a lot of us do already, but there are sort of ways that we can just make even sort of more basic drills perhaps more competitive, and just kind of get a little bit more out of the players without actually having to change the drill or rethink of anything. We can just make sort of quite small, subtle changes. But again, just finishing on that point there, we just have to make sure they're kind of randomized really, and because the game is random, so we have to make sure that when we're putting together a session, a good example, for example, is when we played Australia in the World Cup. We knew that a team like that usually come after us in the first 15 minutes. They try to play like a high intensity game at the start. So what we did with our working week is we made sure that our sort of drills at the start of the sessions were matched to what we anticipated. So when we did that on our Tuesday session, we made sure that the players then were comfortable in understanding what was coming ready for the weekend. So again, we can make sure that we can randomize this and change the way that the sessions are put together, change the drills and how they're put together. And it kind of allows for players to be problem solving, but also increasing and more closely replicating the demands of a game. So just like a couple of take-home points really, sort of the last sort of 5 minutes. So overall, look, we've got to use research to inform our practice, whether it's internal or external research. Like I say, we've got plenty of resources there, and there's a lot of smart people out there, and a lot more clever than I am to kind of manipulate data and to understand it and kind of bring to the fore what's actually happening in these moments. But like I said, we've got to make sure that's in a language that players and coaches understand, for us to make sure that we can kind of take that forward into our practice. Another thing really is just small changes can make big differences. So I think something that I think has been a bit inadvertently wasn't meant to be as big a game changer as what it was, but just how we structure training has actually sort of been something that has made a big difference to us. It has made sure that we can get sort of more out of the players without actually adding any extra stress to them. And that's been quite a big difference. So again, when we consider the demands of the drill, just how we can make each individual drill perhaps a little bit more challenging in whichever way, and then also that session order. Again, the final one from that, I think something which I'm kind of learning really is that we need to make sure we provide the players to be creative and problem solve. And I think that's something that probably is a little bit undersold, is just making sure that players are creative, because in games, whether you've got a mismatch, things like that, there's certain things that make sure that the playbook goes out the window. So we want to make sure that when the players are in those situations, they can express themselves and make the correct decisions, as opposed to just making sure that so many drills are so task orientated that we're not encouraging the players to necessarily think. So just kind of finishing up really with kind of like my overall sort of thoughts really. So like I said, under pressure, we don't rise to the occasion, we stoop to the level of our training. So, we need to make sure we consider our limiting factors of performance. So whatever sport you're in, I think that's something that we got to really do. And, eventually sort of what makes the boat go faster. The reality will never be perfect. I think anybody that's I know I was probably 10 years ago, thought that I could probably change the world. Truth is I haven't. So, I think the sooner that we realise that there is no sort of perfect scenario, the better it will be. And then finally we can always find a better process to get closer, and that's okay too. I think so many times we sort of try to attain what's perfect and try to strive for perfection, but actually kind of being one step closer is also an improvement, and that's something that we need to acknowledge. I know people that have worked with me kind of understand that, but I think that's something that I think people do try to attain for that perfection so much that they kind of think unless you can't get there, then there's no point. Well, I think taking one step or two steps closer to that is definitely better than where you were. That's more or less me all kind of finished up. If anybody's got any questions, then obviously drop them on to Steve, or feel free to get in touch but via email or whatever.